Hello, everyone. My name is Imran Ahmad. I'm a partner here at Norton Rose Fulbright Canada. Delighted to be joined by my colleague, Roxanne Caron, who's a member of our technology law practice, but also of our privacy group. And she is based in our Montreal office. So welcome, Roxanne.
Hello.
We are going to be talking about recent developments out of Quebec with the Commission à l'accès à l'information issuing guidelines on valid consent. So maybe starting there first, Roxanne, can you tell us what these guidelines are exactly?
Yes, so those guidelines were published very recently, so end of May 2023, and these are aimed at to help organization with the new requirements under Law 25. So what is important to remember by context is by default, personal information is confidential. Individual can exercise control over the use and circulation of their information by giving or, as importantly, by withholding consent. To be legally valid, the consent must meet certain criteria. These guidelines focus on how to meet each of these criteria and bring kind of more nuance to what is in effect a very short article of the law.
Okay, that makes sense. So can you tell us a little bit about what the guidelines on consent of validity are exactly?
Yes. So first of all, a consent has to be clear. There has to be an explicit consent and you can also rely on an implicit consent, but in certain cases, if it's not sensitive information, if there's a reasonable expectation to be used in a context. So if I give my consent to a certain use, if a use is connected to that, then we can use an implicit consent. And there also has to be no risk of serious injury from the communication of use if you're using an implicit consent. The consent also have to be free. It has to be a choice. I'm not forced to give a consent to someone. It has to be informed. And this is where the importance of a privacy policy shines through. You have to understand why you're giving the consent, to which purposes, what is collected about you, and what's going to be done to that personal information. It has to be granular. So you give a consent to a specific purpose for each purpose. So you can't give a whole broad consent that will be used for anything and everything. As I just mentioned, it has to be specific, given for specific purposes, which again are stated in a privacy policy. It has to be understandable. So the privacy policy has to be legible, readable by a normal individual. It needs to be very clear and constricted. It has to be distinct, so it can't be buried, for example, in a long agreement or contract. It needs to be also temporary, so it only needs to be for the time required to fulfill the purpose. You can't give a consent for the end of time, basically.
Yeah, no, those are good factors to list. Are there situations where you may have an exception where you don't need to get consent?
There's actually many exceptions that are listed in the law. One of the main exceptions is, for example, disclosure of personal information for service providers. Even then, when there's exceptions, so you don't need the consent of the individual, for example, to disclose the personal information to a service provider, it's still very constricted by certain obligation. In that case, you have to have a written agreement with certain criteria or elements there to support the safety or the security of the personal information.
Yeah, that makes sense. Anything else our audience should know about these guidelines from your perspective?
And the first thing to know is this is not the official version of the guidelines. We're still in a consultation period until I think the July 2nd date. Also, and this is, I think, one of the biggest draw to the guidelines is that it provides examples, it provides scenarios, which gives more color and nuance to the article in the law, which is, as I was mentioning, very short. So you give more, you understand a bit better what the Commission d'accès à l'information has in mind when saying something is compliant or not. Finally, and this is very important for organization, there's a section on how to collect consent and how to keep a record of consent, because obtaining the consent is important, but you also have to keep a trace of it. So an organization should keep that in mind as well.
Fantastic. As always, you've been very, very succinct and to the point. So thank you for doing this. And thank you for keeping an eye on what's going on in the province of Quebec, where there's a lot of key developments happening. And for our audience, stay tuned. We'll have other capsules like this one where we will be tracking developments, not just in Quebec and in Canada, but globally as well, that may be of interest to our clients. Thank you again.
Thank you.